Welcome to Thoughtfully Mindless. My guest in this episode is Germinal G Van. Germinal is an economist and an award-winning author. He's the winner of the 2021 Best Indie Book Award in Socioeconomic History, a finalist of the 2022 National Indie Excellence Award in U.S. History, and he's the founder and editor-in-chief of GGV Publishing Company, LLC. We have a great conversation around economics, politics, and the relationship between those two. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. And with that, let's welcome Germinal. All right, Germinal, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks, Arthi. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to get started, you're in Chicago, right? How long have you been in Chicago?
So I have been in Chicago. In fact, I live in Oak Park, which is like 15 minutes away from Chicago, the actual city. I've been there since 2018.
Okay.
So it's been close to 6 years. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Close to 6 years.
So Chicago has a reputation. It gets a lot of bad publicity for like crime and things like that. I figured since you actually live around the area, maybe you can give a in-person analysis. Is it as bad as some people say? I mean, it has the nickname of Chirac, or it used to at some point. Is it as bad and dangerous, or is it just certain parts that are dangerous? Or what's your analysis?
Yeah, so every city has its good and its bad parts. So I don't think Chicago is necessarily that different. I think the reason why Chicago may have like a very bad reputation, it's because of the intensity of the crimes. So of course, if you go to South Side, that's where the rough neighborhoods are.
Yeah.
But on the North Side, on the other hand, in Uptown, it's pretty fine. Like my wife and I, we go there, we spend time there, and it's a good area to go. So it's I would say it's mostly the south part of the city that is dangerous,
Yeah.
and the crime there is just intense. That's why Chicago gained a reputation for being like a notorious city in terms of crime. I used to live in DC before moving to Chicago, and back then there was like a part of DC called there was Anacostia and Capitol Heights and all these areas in BC that were pretty much rough neighborhoods too. And, these were the parts that you don't want to go. And then you have like the northwest part of DC, which was pretty good to be around. It was pretty much safe. But of course, crime happened there, but it was very low. Like the rates were extremely low. And it's the same in Chicago too. So it really depends where you are and at a certain time as well.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like that's the case with a lot of areas that have bad crime.
Yeah.
Like Chicago's a massive city, millions of people there, right? And
Yep.
I've done a bit of traveling around the U.S. and most major cities are like that, where there's a couple blocks or an area where crime is just worse, So
Yeah.
that makes sense that you can. So it's manageable. Like you can,
Mhm.
you know where not to go. You know how to avoid it. It's not like you're walking anywhere in Chicago and you're at risk all the time. So
Yeah.
all right, that's really cool to hear. I have some family near Chicago, so they enjoy it, and I've always kind of wondered, like, how bad is it really? Because you can turn on conservative media, and they're going to say it's really bad, and then you'll turn on left-wing media, they will just not mention it at all. So,
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
but what are the main issues facing Chicago? Because it does have its fair share of corruption and its economic problems, and you're an economist, you know a lot about economics. So what are the main issues facing Chicago specifically?
Well, one of the main things is basically access to opportunities. But the question is, how do you grant access to opportunities? Do you create permissive laws, or do you put more regulations? We know that, and this is not just in Chicago, but anywhere on earth, right? When you implement permissive laws, meaning that government does less and less, basically they implement laws that enhance individual liberty. People have the right to do X, Y, Z. We know that it increases efficiency, it increases productivity because people have the freedom to decide how they want to allocate their resources. But when you put more rules, more regulations, by essence, those rules are restrictive and punitive. If you look at legislation, it's always about the things you're not supposed to do. It's
Mm,
preventing. So this is something to really understand between rules and regulation. Rules refer to things that we're allowed to do. Regulations and legislation are man-made. It's about things you're not supposed to do. And the things that you're not supposed to do restrict your ability to exert your potential and produce something of value. So, in order to create access to opportunity, well, you need to create access, and access means to permit, to allow people. But if government keeps implementing regulations in order to create access, it doesn't really create access because it prevents those who have the means to actually add value to do so. So what government does is transferring that quote unquote access to opportunities, is deferring it to those who don't have the means. Therefore, what it does is that it leads to suboptimal outcomes. By suboptimal outcomes, I mean that outcomes that are basically underneath what what it should be. So that's where the issue is.
interesting. So it's a matter of not giving the opportunities where the opportunities would be most beneficial for the economy, essentially.
Yeah. So if I can put it this way, they measure opportunity by outcome. And I think this is like it's not a good way to determine the outcome of something, because measuring opportunity by outcome simply means that based on what the outcome is, or you know that it will be, you discriminate within opportunities, right? You try
Mm,
to select which opportunities you believe fit best. But when you measure outcome by the opportunity, it means that since you don't know what the outcome will be, you go with the flow. You go with whatever opportunity that is available to you, and you maximize that opportunity available to you. So using, it's like maximizing output with the least resources available to you. And I think people who have that mentality produce a lot. And I'm one of those people where like I can have like very restrained resources and still find a way to create output out of those limited resources I have.
So, as far as the quality of outcome that's being pushed, are we talking like race outcome, gender outcome, social class outcome? What is it that's being, what is the outcome that they're trying to create equality regarding?
It's equality of outcome. And while race is always the issue that is brought up, things were never about race. It's always about social class.
Okay.
And the reason why is because, in a capitalist society, the major struggle is not regarding your skin color, it's about your social class. Those who have the financial power rule over those who don't have. That's social Darwinism. That's how it is. And most people, the way they want to do is that it's unfair. Well, sure, it might be unfair, but we live in a society where you have the ability to move from one social class to another. That's the beauty of American society. That's the beauty of capitalism. It's the social mobility is fluid, right? If you make enough income, you can move from middle class to upper class, and you can move from upper class to the very wealthy. It depends on.
Yeah.
But so it's always about social class. And race is just like used as a scapegoat to justify why we should do things a certain way. But the ultimate goal has always been equality of outcome. But the problem with equality of outcome is that you're punishing those who have abilities, who have certain skills, you're punishing them simply for having them. Because by trying to level up the playing field for everyone at the same time, it doesn't guarantee that they will still generate the same outcome. That's the issue. And for example, let's say you measure, I don't know, like let's say like you're like 6 feet tall, right? Or maybe like you're 7 feet tall. So that means that you're fit to play basketball.
Yeah.
On top of playing basketball, basketball has rules, right? The field has rules. And you maybe because you're tall, so you may be good at 3 points. If we get rid of those 3 points, you're at a disadvantage, right? Because we get rid of that rule of the 3 points. So, and people who get rid of that rule of the 3 points say that, oh no, we have to give a chance to shorter to shorter players to make their marks. But you know what I mean? So getting rid of that rule will not make the other better.
Yeah.
It's like if you're not, basically based on who you are and what you have, it's important to find a field where you know that you can be good at. That's what it is. I, for example, cannot play basketball. I don't have the height. I don't have the physical strength for it. So I'm not gonna go and play basketball. And because I suck at it, I will say, hey, like you guys need to impose quotas. You have to take people like me, and you cannot just take all tall players,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. Right. So that's what equality of outcome is about. It's about trying to level up the field by preventing those who have the skills and abilities to be good at something to exert those skills and abilities. But the beauty of life is that we're different, and that's what makes us individuals, right? We're all human beings. That's the very basic. We're all human beings, whether you're black, white, Asian, Arab, whatever your skin color. We're all human beings by nature. Then we're individuals because we have a specific personality, we have specific skills, we have specific flaws that is within us, that makes us who we are, that make us unique.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. And it's when we bring all of that together, where we try to coexist and bringing our strength and flaws together, that we create something more valuable. And I think that's what has always made the United States a special place, a melting pot, because we all come from somewhere.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. I came from I'm originally from Ivory Coast. You can pick from my voice and my accent that I speak French. Like French is my first language. And I always try to be into things that I know. For example, right, I know that I'm good at intellectual stuff. So what I do, I commercialize my intellect by writing books, by owning a publishing company where I can publish my own work and the work of others, by writing articles, sharing my knowledge with people. Knowledge is the only commodity that gains value when it is spread around, because the more you share with people, the better people know and they can implement that. And I've always argued that the actual reason of the wealth gap is information. But we'll come to that in a second. It's how people use information. But yeah, equality of outcome is what people are trying to implement. And one way to implement equality of outcome, not even one way, the main way to implement equality of outcome is to promote democracy. But democracy is a horrible system. And people confuse democracy with a system of democratic elements, right? The United States is a government that has democratic elements in its political system, but it doesn't mean that it's a democracy. Because democracy, by essence, is the rule of the majority, and the rule of the majority is equality. But when you promote democracy, you subvert individual liberty. You prevent people from doing their best and creating value.
Yeah, a couple things there. First, I had to come to the same realization as you with basketball. I grew up watching Michael Jordan because I was born outside of Chicago, and at some point, I wanted to be like him. And at some point, I had to come to the face the facts that I was lacking in the height department and the athleticism department. I'm athletic, but nowhere near anything as athletic as him. Um, I agree with you that knowledge has caused a lot of the separation of, and I think it's just factually true, right? Like, what have been the major threats to the power structures over the years? Like, the printing press was a major threat to the power structures in place. The internet was also a major threat to the power structures in place because both of them have the potential to spread information that was not even possible to that same level before that. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially with the internet. You know, before the internet, it was very it was more difficult to start a business, for example. Because when you want to start a
Yeah.
business, you need not just to file for the LLC or the corporation, but you need to get like an actual local, like, a place, a physical address where you're going to go to work and pay the rent and everything. So you technically needed couple $1,000s to kick off.
Correct.
But with the internet today, you and I were sitting. I'm sure you're doing your podcast, which is your business from your room, and
Mm-hmm.
you probably making a living off that. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of the internet, because you were able to capitalize on the information available to you. And I said previously that information is actually the fundamental factor of the wealth gap. Those who are wealthy because they capitalize on the information available to them. Let me give you one example. Jeff Bezos. We can say what we want about Jeff Bezos, right? Sometimes we can criticize his business practices. But the reason why Jeff Bezos became wealthy was because when he worked at D.E. Shaw, one of the most sophisticated hedge fund in the world, he was actually, first of all, doing well for himself. He was like 30 or 31. He was vice president of the trading department, something like that. And he stumbled on the information that he can generate returns of 2,300% with the internet.
Hmm.
That is the information he got. He had two choices. You can see the information and be like, oh, okay, well, that's cool, and move on with his day. The second choice was, okay, how can I actually do that? How can I make it happen? And we all know what choice he made between those two.
Yeah.
History speaks for itself. It's the same. For example, I can give my own example. How did I start my publishing company? I knew that I was good at writing. I always wrote. In fact, I started writing books like when I was like 16 or 17, but I never finished them. Never finished them. And then one day, and my mom is someone, she hates when people start things and don't go through it, like you don't
Yeah.
finish the whole thing. So I said, I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to do it. So I finally published my first book in 2018. But that's when I discovered that Amazon offers services of self-publishing.
Hmm.
So I saw that. I'm like, okay, here Jeff Bezos gives me a chance to publish my own work. Before, the only way was to go through a publisher. But of course, don't get me wrong, self-publishing has its own drawbacks too. Like, sure, you can publish your own work in terms of income. Whatever book sold, it goes straight to you. But in terms of exposure, you're more limited,
Yeah.
especially if you have big aspirations. Like if you one day want to become like a New York Times bestseller, or if you want to win awards, maybe it's better to go with a publisher. So, and I also published with publishers before, so I'm like a full complete author. Like I experience both aspects, self-publishing and with a publisher. And then I was like, okay, what these publishers do is not rocket science. I can do the same.
Yeah.
So I say, you know what? I had $200 on me. I said, I'm going to start my publishing company with that, with just $200. I filed for the LLC and everything. Went to the bank and put $200 in it. Then start working on the website. And then I said, since I kind of built a brand, because I publish like 2 dozen books before starting my publishing company. I'm going to offer my service to people to help them also becoming authors, because the publishing industry is a pretty restrictive industry. The most established companies don't allow authors to come in. So I say, like, I want to democratize that. I want to grant that access, because there are many people who actually produce good work, but they don't have the chance. We can even take the case of J.K. Rowling. She got rejected 13 times
Yeah.
before someone finally say, you know what, this has value. Maybe we should give her a shot. The rest is history, as we know. So that's what I wanted to do. I capitalize on the information that now that we live in the age of the internet, I can literally start my publishing company from home. I don't have to go rent a place and pay rent and all these costs, startup costs. I cut all of that. All I have to do is to pay for the website, to run the website, and pretty much that's it, and make the books print on demand using Amazon and Lulu and these software, these self-publishing softwares, and work with that. And then so that's how that's how it happened. So it's all about how you use the information available to you, because it's easy to blame the system. I agree the system is not perfect, but what do you do with the information given to you? There are a lot of people, they have information, they don't use it. And then they complain that they're paying more taxes than average. Life isn't fair to them. They're in debt, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, as I said, the wealth gap is not a matter of race, because if it was a matter of race, no minority on this in this country will be a millionaire, let alone a billionaire. We have black billionaires, we have Asian billionaires, Asian millionaires. So it's not about race. It's about how you use the information given to you.
I wonder uh, how cool would it be to hear the thoughts of one of those publishers that rejected J.K. Rowling's. Like,
Right.
oh, what a series of books to pass up on. Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. As far as democracy, you mentioned democracy being a bad system earlier. Can you dive into that a little bit? And I've tried to talk to people about this, and a lot of people don't seem to understand what democracy actually is. Like, and tell me if I'm wrong. So, in an actual democracy, we have a representative, a republic. We have a constitutional republic in the United States, and we have democratic elements to it. But in a true democracy, every person would be voting on every single issue, correct? Which, first of all, who would have the time for that? We just don't have the time as individuals to run our own lives and participate in the political system to that extent. But specifically, I want to touch on why it's a bad system. So I I know one of the arguments for it being a bad system are minority political minorities get shut out. So if you have a group that doesn't go along with the masses, then their voice just gets completely shut out. So a true democracy would have really bad protections for minority voters. And I'm not talking about race here, I'm talking about minority political positions, you know?
Yeah, in terms of numbers, yeah.
Yeah. So can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So it's a, as I said, it's a bad system because it shuts out the minority. But even let me give you a practical example. When you look at, for example, blacks in America, I wrote several books on Black America. Black. So when you look at Black people in America, specifically after the abolition of slavery, um, they had at the national level, they had constitutional rights, right? The government, some stuff they were supposed to be protected under the Constitution. But when you look at the state level, especially in the Bible Belt or the state down there, Black people were completely shut out.
Hmm.
That was actually real brutal democracy. They were even hanged on trees, they were lynched.
Yeah.
That was democracy, because if the majority said, okay, we want to get rid of those, if 51% say yes, the 49% don't have a voice. And that's clearly what happened. So now, to be more philosophical about the question you ask, it's a bad system because on top of shutting out the minority, it seeks equality of outcome. That's actually the goal, and that's why if you look at democracy, they always try to create factions. So they use the individual and break that individual into factions. You're white, so you belong to one class of voter. You're male, you belong to another class of voter. You're Christian, so you belong to another class of voters. So you already, as an individual, you already belong to three class of voters, right? So imagine if you're a woman. So you're white, woman, Christian. So you technically, yeah, three class of voters. And then let's say you're gay, another class of voter. So basically, that's what democracy attempts to do, is breaking the individual into factions to increase the possibility of to gain more votes. So increase the possibility of getting more votes. That's what it's about. And and on top of that, it pretty much impedes people again to do the things that they're good at, because and the system in itself will never favor the minorities. But minorities are human beings like you and I, so they have a say in the system too. But if pure democracy is about majority rule, and what if majority is wrong? Now, that means that we have to implement policies that will affect us for generations, because policies, when we implement policy, whatever they have like long-term effect. That's
Yeah.
what the thing is about. So when 51% is wrong and they say we're going to implement those policies, it's going to affect it doesn't just affect the majority itself, it affects everyone else. That's the
Yeah.
issue. If the majority has power to vote, but it only affects them, no problem, right? So basically they socialize the losses. So they privatize the gain, in the sense that the gain is the sense that the majority, if there are three people in the room, two people agree, the third one is left out. They privatize the gain here. But if the choice they made is a bad choice, it's going to affect not just the two people who made that choice, but the third person that was left out too.
Yeah.
So that's why it's not, in my opinion, it's not a good system. It gives the illusion that voting is freedom.
Hmm.
And people confuse democracy with freedom. Democracy is not freedom. It's not because you get to select your representative, or because the transfer of political power is done peacefully, that it is freedom. Freedom is the policies, the permissive policies that allow you to get into the free enterprise.
Hmm.
So let me give you an example. Uh, you have countries okay, where I'm from in Ivory Coast, right? Uh, Between 1960 and 1990, pretty much all African countries were the same. They were all one party states. That's how it was. That was the deal. And then you got to choose whether you're with the US or with the Soviet Union. But politically, there was no freedom because it was a one party state. But economically, where I'm from, we had a liberal economic policy. So people were economically free,
Hmm.
but politically they couldn't vote, right? Because we have a one party state, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. So people confuse that because you vote, you're free. No, you're not free, because I think the person you're voting for is going to implement rules and regulations on you that they don't even implement on themselves. That's the real deal.
Yeah.
So it's literally unfair. But when you have, let's say, a monarchy or even a dictatorship, but people have the right to start a business, they have the right to choose whatever they want to do. That's freedom. So that's real freedom. So democracy is not freedom. It's not because political power is transferred peacefully and you have the right to vote, that you're free. That's not freedom. Freedom is about the policies implemented that allow you to get into the free enterprise.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I really liked what I want to dive deeper into the creating factions aspect because this is something I probably haven't articulated well, so I'm probably not going to say everything correctly, but I actually find it kind of disgusting when I watch politics and everything is putting people into these categories, like you mentioned. Um, Not to make any assumptions, but you'd be put into the black category. I'd be put into the white category. Um, we'd both be put into the male category, right? And it's kind of disgusting because it takes away your individuality. Because I've met plenty of white people who have very disparate views, and there's plenty of black people that have very disparate views. And then another thing I'd like you to give me some feedback on is the idea of calling groups communities is kind of weird to me because a community to me, the way that it's used seems to be more of political grouping. So the black community believes this. You can't talk about any large group of people and really summarize what they believe because it's a bunch of individuals and not all of them are going to believe that. And the white community believes this. So when I hear the word community being used, I see it as somebody wants to talk about a group of people and they want to paint it with a broad brush. So they use the word community to kind of hide what they're really doing when they're talking about that group of people because it seems like the opposite of what it comes off as. Like it seems if we're talking about race, it seems actually kind of racist. Or when we're talking about sex, it's more sexist than anything.
No, I see exactly what you're saying. In fact, it boils down to one word, or not one word, but one statement is shut down critical thinking. That's it. Putting people into groups is to shut down critical thinking. The socialists, those with left leanings, they see society as they have a holistic view of society. Basically, what I mean by holistic is this: they start from top down. They see a group detached from the individuals that make up the group. They see the group in itself as an organic, independent being. So when you're part of that group, your individuality no longer matters. You give up yourself for the common good. That's one word that the left loves to use, the common good. Everything you do must be done for the community. But at the end of the day, human beings are self-interested people, no matter how hard we try to be altruistic. So the reality and nature always catch up with us. Eventually, the members of the group, when things start to not go as planned, the critical thinking comes back. Now the issue is that they cannot speak up because the leader of the group, who is still an individual like the rest of the group, has imposed his will on everyone else. So the concept of groupthink is so fallacious because there's always one person who still thinks within the group. Now, instead of a group of people thinking for themselves and bringing their thoughts together, it's one person who thinks for everyone else. That's why you say, oh, the white community thinks this, the black community. No, the black community doesn't think a certain way. They force you to think that way. And that's where I have, for example, an issue with culture because, for example, when you look at black people behaving a certain way, or let's say, right, me, they will say, oh, yeah, you're articulate, you went private school, you might be, stop acting white. What does it mean, stop acting white? How being articulate is a white thing? How using logic is a white thing? White people didn't create logic. Since when common sense is a white thing. So that means I have to be emotional, I have to be stupid to be black. Basically, you're insulting yourself without even realizing it. How being articulate is a white thing. On the contrary, being articulate opens opportunity. It gives you opportunities. You never know. Every person you interact with is an interview. Because if the person you're interacting with likes you and has the capital, boy, that's life-changing opportunities you just hit right there. That's why it's important to always be on your best behavior when you interact with people, because you don't know when opportunity will strike. And that's not a white thing. That's common sense. That's logic. That's simply being a civilized person,
Yeah.
right? But if you say that, oh, you're not black, I'm like, who the hell are you? Did you set up a barometer to measure the Africanness or the blackness of someone? And that's what groupthink does.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon that people want to instill these ideas and like this is black, this is white, all of this, and it's like you're absolutely right. Like the ability to articulate yourself, the ability to express your ideas and have them understood by the person that you're talking to or the group of people that you're talking to is powerful beyond imagination. There are people who have risen to national presidents in different countries and in our country just based on their ability to speak and have their ideas understood. So I don't think you can understate the importance of being able to articulate your ideas well. And that is definitely not limited to any race of people. Like there's no race of people, there's no group of people that have a hold on expressing ideas on anything like that. So it's quite absurd. And when when people use the term community and to talk about that, would you say they're trying to instill characteristics on everyone in the group that they're trying to paint?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's all, you see, it's important to understand semantics, because there's certain words they use, and if you stand up against those words, because the reason why you stand up is because you understand the actual meaning behind it or the intent behind it. So you're like, I don't deal with this bullshit. Sorry for
Oh,
cussing. You
you're
can
good.
edit that out. But I don't deal with that crap, right? So you understand. But then they will say that you are against the common good,
Yeah,
because using community, using equality, using democracy, those words pertains to the common good. And the common good is a good thing to aspire. How can you dare to be against the common good?
yeah,
Right? We all want the same thing. No, we don't all want the same thing. That's why we're individuals. What you want is not what I want, bro. I don't have to subscribe to your thing. You don't have to subscribe to mine. That's why we live in a free country and we have the First Amendment, which protects our freedom to think for ourselves.
yeah,
Otherwise, what's the point? So that's why the concept of community is it's foolish. In fact, it is dangerous. It is dangerous. It is sneaky. It is sneaky. Yeah, because if you already you say, especially as a white man, you say, "Oh no, like I don't believe in this." You know the race label will be attached to you ASAP.
yeah,
ASAP. Although you haven't done anything wrong, they'll say, "Oh yeah, he's a racist."
yeah. Yeah, it's I think the community thing brings other things down the road too. Like I've heard, you can hear a criticism, you can hear a white person criticizing a black person, accusing them of voting against their own interests. Or you can hear it for the other groups too. And it's amazing when I hear that because I'm like, that is so condescending to tell
Thank
somebody
you. That was the word I was going to use.
that their individual view is against their own interest somehow because of you have a perception of what their view should be because of their skin color or what's
Yeah,
in their
yeah,
pants or yeah, it's just wild.
yeah. It's me, for example. People will say that I'm a sellout. I'm an Uncle Tom. Who did I sell to? And it's funny because Those who always say that blacks who don't subscribe to the general dogma of the black community are sellout are actually richer than those who call sellout. It's always that. If you, for example, a guy like Al Sharpton, he would say, "Oh, you're a sellout, bro. You're making millions. I don't have your millions. How am I sellout?"
Yeah.
Dr. Umar, "Oh yeah, these guys are sellout." No, I'm not. Oh, he's a coon, bro. You are making millions of dollars. I don't have your money. Who am I selling you to? What am I selling?
Yeah.
That's always how it is. It's all because it all boils down to, as I said, shutting down critical thinking. Because it is easier to brainwash 10 people than to brainwash one individual. Because the individual you're talking to will ask you questions. Okay, you say this, but how do you explain this? You say that, how it leads to that. The critical thinking is working. But when you're talking to 10 people, they will start believing whatever you say simply because it sounds good or it sounds true. And one thing I always say is that it's not because something is logically consistent that it is empirically true.
Hmm.
And you have, for example, uh, again, I can use Dr. Umar as an example. Dr. Umar is a very articulate guy for me, right? He's a very articulate. That's why he has a huge following base. People
Yeah.
believe in what he's saying. But Dr. Umar never showed evidence, empirical evidence from studies of everything he talks about. People buy into it because it appeals to the emotions, and it appeals to the emotions because in their mind, logically, it makes sense. Yes, I agree. Logically, it makes sense, but does it mean that it is empirically true? Not necessarily. We have to test that,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. So it's so when you talk to 10 people or more, when 9 of those 10 people agree, they will impose the will on you and force you to agree with them. Democracy.
That kind of makes me think of hypnosis. There's a phenomenon with hypnotists where they'll bring people on stage, and those people that might not be susceptible on a one-on-one session, um, they might be susceptible because of the idea of the hypnotist being in a power position. But in general, the hypnotist has more influence on the individual in front of a group of people because that person feels like they need to, there's an expectation on them to go along with what's expected.
It's the placebo effect.
Yeah.
The placebo effect. Yeah, I watched actually a documentary on the dark side of the mega church, right? The
Mm.
false miracles they perform and everything.
Yeah.
You see someone sitting in the wheelchair, and then suddenly the guy gets up and start walking. Oh, God performed the miracle and all this stuff. In fact, it's because, for example, when I use that very example of the person sitting in the wheelchair and then they perform the quote unquote miracle and then the guy gets up, it's the placebo effect, meaning that that person in its mind was already prepared to react that way.
Yeah.
And then if you ask that same pastor to perform that very same miracle again after 48 hours, it will not work.
Mm.
So that's how it is. Like, so when you bring someone on stage, the person is already expecting. So they adjust the mind and the body to react to that expectation.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Can we dive into economics a little bit? I'm
Please
wondering,
do.
we're $34 trillion in debt as a nation,
Mhm.
as the United States is right now. What does that mean? How did we get here? And where is it going?
Great. Okay. I recently finished working on a book called Understanding the Credit Based System. You're actually the first to know about this. I haven't done any announcement yet on the publishing website. No one knows. So you're the first. Congratulations. um, how did we get to those $34 trillion in debt? We got there by this phenomenon called printing money, expending credit, and money is worthless. Money is worthless because, as you know, we have a fiat currency. It is not based by anything but by debt. And the problem with money being based on debt is that you are basically using the real value of future resources for present consumption. That's what debt is about. That's what
Yeah.
debt is hard. That's what when you're in debt, it's hard to grow. And that's why I always say, even at the private level, I always say never start a business by going to debt. It doesn't make sense. You don't know how much money you're gonna make. You don't know what your cash flow will be. Yes, you did all these projections on your business plan. That's business plan. There's reality. Once you launch the business, it's on the market. How much money are you making per month or per year? What is the
Yeah.
cash flow? If you don't know that, you should never start with debt, because no matter how much you're making, you have to service the debt. So it prevents or reduce your growth. We have $34 trillion in debt. We have a GDP of $25 trillion. Normally, the GDP of the US should be at least $100 trillion. We produce so much. But because of the national debt, we're 25 trillion. And we're 25 trillion, and we are 34 trillion in debt. So that means that we're over leveraged. It means that the government, the US has more liabilities than assets, especially on the government balance sheet. The government balance sheet, the asset side is probably 5 or 10 trillions, and the debt side is 34 trillion.
Yeah.
So when the government borrows money constantly to spend on whatever they call, to grow the economy, it creates what we call the crowding out effect. The crowding out effect means that the government now competes with private businesses for resources. And so when the government prints money, which adds to the national debt, it increases interest rates for everybody. You see, it comes back again to my point of socializing the losses. So government makes a decision that affects everybody, whether you were part of that decision or not. So the interest payments on those on the national debt divert not just government but private businesses from productive investment, because it makes harder for us now to borrow money, because the more the debt increase, the higher the interest payment becomes. And those interest payments that we have to contribute as a society to the national debt increase the cost of living.
Hmm.
That's what people don't realize. Because how do you justify for that? The average cost of education back in the United States, back before 1971, was roughly $2,000. Now, that same cost of education is 50, 55, maybe 60K a year,
Yeah.
right? It's because of the national debt, because the national debt increased the cost of living. But the cost of living is not equal to the living standard necessarily. Yes, the living standard of the United States has tremendously increased. Absolutely. We produce a lot. But government is doing economics the wrong way. Because what government is trying to do is to create economic growth by stimulating demand. You don't create economic growth by stimulating demand. You create economic growth by stimulating supply, because supply creates its own demand. You create a product, right? You have a prototype. That's how it works. You have a prototype. You put that prototype in the market to see how people will react to that prototype. And when people like it, it gains traction. And when that traction now grows significantly, you can now turn that prototype into the finished product and put it in the market. And that's how you create a market. And then as people like the product, demand grows.
Hmm.
But when you try to stimulate demand rather than supply, what you do is that you're putting money in people's hand for for the quantity of goods and services that doesn't match that demand. And it's that mismatch that creates inflation. Inflation is the result of a mismatch between the price of goods and services and the quantity of goods and services. That's all it is. And inflation is not created by anything else than government, because government has the power to print money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people will say, "Oh, inflation is created by corporate greed." It's nonsense. It is created by government printing money because money is non-neutral, meaning that it affects the economy. When you inject money in the economy, whether you inject or retract money, there's an effect in it. It doesn't. It always affects people.
With you'll hear people talk about, I don't want my taxes to go to that, and I don't want my taxes to go to that. And my understanding is your taxes aren't actually going to anything but paying the interest on the debt. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and the reason why is because government. So there are two ways for government to raise money. They can raise through tax revenue, or they can raise through borrowing. If government try to use tax revenue to fund their expenditures or to fund their stuff, no one would be incentivized to work because you really have to tax people almost like 90%, right? If you're
Yeah.
making, right, like whatever you make, government take 90% of what you're making. So you will no longer be incentivized to work. So government then rather borrows so that it is no longer constrained by how much money it can raise to to meet its obligations and fund its expenses. That's what it is. So pretty much, and that's what Ken said. It is okay to run deficits to stimulate economic growth. Again, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Think about this, right? Let's say your podcast is your business. Imagine you maybe for the first 2 years you can run your podcast on a deficit, sure, because you're trying to grow it.
Yeah.
But eventually, you have to turn a profit because profit is what shows the health, the financial health of an organization. If your organization is not profitable, eventually it's going to collapse. But government doesn't have the profit motive. Why? Because and this is our fault. It's our fault because we are the one who say we believe that government should do X, Y, Z for us.
Yeah.
But the things we say that government should do for us is not free either. Government has to get the money from somewhere to do those things. So when it borrows money and to do those things, the profit motive of government here is to increase its electoral base. Because when we see government doing more things for us, now we're now encouraged to rely more on the government to continue providing goods and services to us. But what's funny is that those goods and services the government provides, it actually takes it from the private sector to start with. It use existing resources from the private sector and they transfer it to the public sector and resell those to us. Nothing new because government by essence creates nothing.
Yeah.
It doesn't create anything. It doesn't produce any value in its own, any value on its own.
One of my biggest positions politically is I'm anti-war. I think war is a horrible. I don't know if I can call it a human invention. It definitely has a human aspect that no other animal has. But I think there is war among chimpanzees and stuff like that. So I think you might see war in the animal kingdom, but we have perfected the disgusting aspects of war as human beings, and I'm very anti-war. And the way I look at fiat money and um, central banking is, if the United States government, like you said, they'd have to tax us 90% to pay for everything that they want to pay for. If the United States government or any government one day said, "Hey, we want to go to war with this country, but it's going to take a lot of resources and we need to take 90% of your money," there would be a revolt overnight. Like no one would stand for that, or hopefully no one would stand for that. But fiat money and the central banking system allows them to do that like in an underhanded way. They say, because people don't realize what's going to happen down the road. Like some people do. Like, I mean, we know what's happening when they print more money. We know that our whatever we have in our bank account right now is going to be worth less in a year. We know that, but it's a way for them to do it. And instead of taxing us now 90%, they promise to reduce the value of our money by 90% in the long run or more.
Because inflation is a hidden tax to start with.
Yeah.
And in fact, I want to emphasize the point you made about war and central banking, the relationship. In fact, paper money, paper currency was created for that, to service wars, because you can never service a war when your currency is tied to a commodity, because a commodity is a finite resource, right? And so commodity money is very useful and effective during time of peace. But during time of wars, because a commodity is a finite resource and the war demands a lot of those resources to be used to, to be financed, therefore, we only rely on paper money. So in fact, war, in my opinion, I'm pretty much speculating here. I don't have any empirical evidence to back this up. But in my opinion, I think that central banking was actually created to service wars.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way, especially before capitalism became the dominant system in the world, we have mercantilism, right? And mercantilism is a system where it believes that the wealth of a nation is based on the amount of gold and raw materials that a nation possesses. But gold and raw materials are finite resource again. So how a nation then increases its wealth when your wealth is based on gold and other raw materials? You have to conquer other territories. And how you do that? Through war.
Yeah.
That's mercantilism. That's why we had colonization, technically.
Yeah. Have you by chance read The Creature from Jekyll Island?
No, I have not.
Okay, so G. Edward Griffin is the author, and he can get a little bit conspiratorial, but I don't think he's wrong on a lot of things. But he pretty much makes that same argument that fiat money was created for war.
Let me make a point. It's not to cut you off, but I think conspiracy theory is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree.
I think conspiracy theory, in fact, raise points that people never thought of. That's all it is. And when you raise points that the majority never thought of, the believers of democracy say that you're a conspiracist.
Yeah.
All you do is think, okay, what if? That's all conspiracy is. Like, not conspiracy, but that's all it's about. It's the what if. Have you thought of that? Because everything is possible. So it's important to look at things holistically from every angle. That's what I wanted to add.
Well, yeah, and conspiracies really do exist too. Like there are.
Yeah, it does.
Like the book that I was mentioning, The Creature from Jekyll Island. There is a place off the coast of the United States. It's I think off the coast of Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken, or not Atlanta, Georgia. But it's part of the United States. But there was a meeting in the early 1900s between the owner of Chase. I forget his name, but Chase and a few other of the major players in economics, and that's when the Federal Reserve was created. So the whole book revolves around the creation of the Federal Reserve, which is a very interesting entity. I mean, it's an entity that's not part of the government, but runs alongside of it and makes decisions that impact every person in the country.
Yeah, I think that the whole notion of they're not part of the government, it's like, okay, because they have shareholders and stuff like that. The government doesn't have shareholders, yes, but the Federal Reserve, to me, is the monetary branch of the government. That's how I see it. They literally, it's the bank of the government.
Yeah.
If the government needs to borrow money, who they borrow it from? From the Federal Reserve. They sell government bonds Federal Reserve gives them the liquidity. That's it. So it's literally the Federal Reserve, the national bank or the central bank. Basically, central banking has always been the banking of government. That's it. So
Yeah.
although the Federal Reserve may not be officially a government entity like the Treasury, like the US Treasury may be, to me, it is government. It's all part of the government.
Yeah. And I have to say, I do agree with you as far as conspiracy theories. You're just asking what if. Most conspiracy theories, very, very few conspiracy theorists are any danger to anybody. Like,
Yeah.
you might see occasional sporadic examples of where somebody takes things too far, but people take other thoughts and ideas too far too. And honestly, if I meet somebody and they don't have a single conspiracy theory, something designated as a conspiracy theory that they don't consider possible, I I would assume I'm dealing with a non-thinking person, like somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't critically think at that point. Because
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, you know, there's people that will disregard something as a conspiracy theory because of politics, and in the United States is one of the most powerful nations in the world right now. They have been for the last since World War II, basically. And you can go to a country with a very small GDP, and the stakes to get to be at the top position in that country, to be president or whatever the position is, are insanely high. And we're talking about countries with insignificant GDPs as far as the world is concerned. So if you don't think the stakes are infinitely higher when it comes to countries like the United States or uh, China, Russia, any of these countries with larger GDPs and a bigger global footprint as far as a geopolitical footprint, I think it's absurd to discount things as conspiracy theories without looking into them more and considering it, because conspiracies absolutely happen in the United States. And I mean, I was talking to a friend about this and he mentioned, well, 9/11 is a conspiracy, no matter what way you look at it. Like, what happened is, if you believe the main narrative of 9/11, that
So it's an inside job.
yeah, well, not even that it's an inside job, but if you believe that hijackers hijacked planes and crashed them into buildings, which I believe that happened, that's a conspiracy right there. Whether you believe anything of government involvement, you believe in a conspiracy because a conspiracy was necessary to make that happen.
Well, we can even brush on the war in Iraq, right? Those
Yeah,
who saw what was happening earlier called it, and people said they were conspiracists. But
yeah,
the war in Iraq, because Dick Cheney said Iraq has weapons of mass destructions. There's no evidence. There's no
yeah,
evidence. And yet he manufactured that whole thing so that the United States can go into Iraq. But why? Because at the time, in addition to being the VP of the United States, he also had stakes in Halliburton, which is a major oil company. And Halliburton was extracting oil in Iraq,
yeah,
right? So this is he was like, sure, he couldn't be the CEO, but he was still like members of the board of directors. Like he was perhaps the chairman of the board. So he had a massive interest. So this whole thing was manufactured up to today. Up to today, they were never able to prove that there was a weapons of mass destruction. That's even why Colin Powell gave up. He said, I can't be part of this. In fact, in my opinion, I believe that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney should be tried. They deserve the death penalty for lying to the American people. They should be sent to the Hague in the Netherlands. But of course, the US is not part of the chart that that create the international court.
yeah,
But if the US was part of that, they should be tried because the same way they did the Nazis and in Nuremberg, the Bush administration should be tried for that too because they manufactured that. They sent thousands of soldiers there to wage a war for no reason, killing people for no reason. And they say it's in the name of democracy. First of all, Arabs did not ask for democracies. Democracy doesn't the culture of democracy doesn't work in every place. Arab culture, it's a totalitarian culture. That's how they live. That's how they like it. You're not going to go and with your liberal philosophies and say that, oh, everyone is equal, liberty, people are free. No. Arabs, there's a reason why, for example, Saudi Arabia, they have a monarchy. If the Saudis don't like the monarch, they can overthrow the guy, because we know that Arabs, they're pretty good at expressing themselves with violence. They don't hesitate. So in Iraq, it's the same. Arab culture is a totalitarian culture. They always need a strong leader to lead them. Whether if it's not a strong leader like a person, it's a strong dictatorial or totalitarian system, because even Islam in itself is a totalitarian religion. And when I say totalitarian, it's because, and people confuse dictatorship with totalitarianism. Dictatorship is simply absolute political power. That's that's what dictatorship is. Totalitarianism is absolute control over every aspect of someone's life. That's what totalitarianism is. So if you have absolute control over someone else's life, you're a totalitarian. That's what it is. And people confuse the two. Yeah. So, and when you look at Islamic religion, it's all about what you're not supposed to do. It's a very punitive and restrictive religion. You're supposed to pray a certain way. You're supposed to wake up at this hour. You're not allowed to eat this and that. And yo, leave me be. But that's Islamic culture. That's the Islamic religion. So the whole thing of going to Iraq to impose democracy was nonsense, and they knew it was nonsense. They had to manufacture it.
Yeah, and that's the same excuse is used today for everything. We have to protect democracy here, but then when democracy doesn't serve us, we need to fight against it and hide the fact that we're fighting against democracy. It's wording. When I was younger, I would pay attention to wording a lot, and I remember watching insurance commercials, and I remember the wording that was used was always interesting to me. Maybe you see a Geico commercial and it says, people who switched from Allstate to Geico saved an average of 20% on their car insurance. And you see an Allstate commercial and it says, people who switched from Geico saved an average of 30% on their car insurance. And I don't know how many people think about that, but for me, it was always something that I caught my attention because I'm like, well, okay, they're playing with words here.
Yeah, it's all semantics.
They're messing with you. They're confusing people because sure, the people that switched saved money, but it doesn't tell you how many people looked for the quote and it was 10 times higher for them or 20% higher for them and it didn't make sense to switch. There could have been one person that switched from Allstate to Geico because it was cheaper. And they can use that and say that, and it's true because that one person who switched saved 20%. But everyone else who looked at the prices would have been paying more had they switched. So it's just semantics, like you said, just a way of wording things and making it true. They're not lying, but they're not really telling the truth either.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you have an opinion on Bitcoin at all?
Yeah, I do. I do, and I personally don't believe in it. I know it's many free marketeers see Bitcoin as the new form of money. Some even see it as an investment, and they think it's the future, which it possibly is. But to me, I don't think I don't see it as like the new thing to literally put your life savings in. And it's not just even Bitcoin, but any financial markets. And this is something I'm going to say, like, people need to understand. When you see people crying on TV, oh yeah, I put my life savings into this and then I'm like, why are you putting your life savings into something you do not have 100% control?
Yeah.
Why? And it's not just Bitcoin. Bitcoin could be crypto, it could be stocks, bonds, whatever type of financial market, even commodities. It doesn't matter. The only thing you should ever put your life savings in, except your savings account, is your business, because you have full control over your business. You control the structure of the business, you control the investors, basically who you want to invest, you control who you want to hire, you control the expenses of your business. You have absolute 100% full control on your business. You don't have control over how a company, whatever stocks you invest, even the most stable stocks, I think that you don't have control over the decisions made. You don't have control over stocks, you don't have control over bonds, you don't have controls over commodities, let alone Bitcoin, crypto. Now, when it comes to Bitcoin, I don't believe in it for a few reasons. Number one, it is not backed by anything. It is not backed by any tangible asset. It's strictly based on supply and demand. And what I find quite irritating is the fact that people have to keep hype it up so that others will invest. I think when something has real value, you don't have to hype it up all the time. You don't have to do aggressive marketing and put down on people's throat so that they put money in it. It speaks for itself. For example, Amazon. Jeff Bezos doesn't have to hype Amazon for us to buy stuff on it. We go willingly on Amazon and buy things. That's why Amazon stocks keeps growing. Same for Tesla. Elon Musk doesn't have to publicize, have to hype it up like, oh yeah, this is your last chance to make money, otherwise you're done. No, we buy Tesla because we believe that Teslas are good cars. But crypto, people have to keep hype it up so that others will put money in it. That's the only way to grow. So it is extremely volatile because it's not backed by anything. Number two, crypto is very slow in terms of transactions. It makes, I think, 7 transactions per second, whereas Visa and MasterCards make 24,000 transactions per second. So why should I go on Bitcoin? So to me, like, I understand the decentralization aspects. That's fair. That's fair. But to me, it's not something I will put a dime in. I never put a single dime in crypto because I don't think that because it's all about speculation. It's even the level of speculation is even worse than commodities, because at least commodities, they're actually tangible assets. When you invest in oil, when you invest in soybean, all of that they're tangible. You know them. You can create like futures contract. But with crypto, you can't do any of that. It's all based on supply and demand. So there is no real value behind it. And on top of that, I'm a guy who loves my dividends. Crypto doesn't pay any dividend. Every stock I invest in, they always pay dividend. Crypto doesn't. So basically, you buy and you have to wait for someone who will be willing to pay a higher price for you to exit. That's not a life. So it depends why people invest in crypto. Those invest because those who see it as an investment want to be rich. That's the right they can do it if they want. Personally, I wouldn't, because as I said, I'm not going to put money into something I don't have control over. It's stupid to do that. And again, what I say is not just for crypto, but for any asset that you do not have control over, except your business. So if you want to build wealth, build a business. Don't build crypto. I said don't build crypto. Don't put your life savings into crypto. You can put some money if you want. Absolutely. I'm not saying don't put any money. If you believe that it has value, if you believe that it's going to become the thing in the future, be my guest and go ahead. But see, when we compare even crypto to stocks, you know that it will have something because it's based on a business.
Yeah.
A stock is a business. Crypto is based on that. You don't even know tomorrow if it will increase in value or not. You have no idea. But a business, you know, and you can, because a business has intrinsic value. That's why I invest in stocks compared to all those stocks are very volatile too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So I do believe in crypto. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi though. Like I believe some of the arguments for Bitcoin are very solid, but I don't necessarily believe Bitcoin is the answer. So I have to push back on a couple things.
Yeah,
I
that's
want
fine.
to pick your brain. Um, What backs gold?
Is pretty much the trust we have in it as a store of value. We believe that gold has value because it's a precious metal. We consider it a precious metal the same way with diamonds. Diamonds is precious because of its scarcity.
Yeah.
That's what actually backs gold.
So I think Bitcoin would be horrible money for like interacting. Like if you and I wanted to uh if you and I went out for dinner and it was like $100 and I wanted to pay for my half of that, I need to send you $50. The Bitcoin fees might be $15. So you'd only end up with $35. And then if you want to send that 35 to somebody, it costs you 15. So you'd only be able to really send about $20.
Mm.
So as actual money, I don't think Bitcoin works. I think other cryptos could be better in that regard. But I would argue that the scarcity aspect, the trust isn't quite there, but the scarcity reality is just as there for Bitcoin as it is for gold. Actually, probably the scarcity aspect is even better for Bitcoin because we actually do know exactly how many Bitcoin will ever exist.
Yeah,
So
I think it's 21 million. That is the total supply.
yeah, I think 21 million is the number. So I think, and here's something else I want to touch on with stocks. And I was talking to my friend about this because I actually do believe, I don't think it'll work out this way, but I think it would be interesting if, I think one way that the people can take control back away from the government and the reckless spending is if people, and you'll see this in countries as their dollars collapse. I think fiat money, the end result of fiat money is going to be zero, no matter what, over a
Oh
long
yeah,
enough period of time. So if people exited out of the US dollar and went into Bitcoin en masse, I think that would strip the power of the United States government to print money indefinitely because it would decrease the value of the US dollar substantially if everyone fled the US dollar. Um, but with stocks specifically, I had this thought. Okay, so one of the ways that people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk avoid paying taxes on their stocks is they take out a loan against their stocks, right? Well, those people are major shareholders in their own companies. So they own a large amount of the shares. So if they were to sell those shares that they just took out a loan against, the stock price would go down significantly. It wouldn't crash or anything, but it would make a dent in the price. Instead, they take out a loan, which means the stock stays there, but now they have debt. So they have money owed against the stock amount that they bought. I feel like that is creating. So I feel like the whole economy, when it comes to the US dollar and stocks to some degree, is kind of a house of cards. And by taking out loans against those stocks and not selling them, they get to keep the price high of the stocks. And now they have debt against those stocks. So now the stock price is dependent on what is done with that debt that was taken out. Because if the debt is used recklessly and they can't pay it back, then the stock has to sell. And I feel like it creates more, and not inflation, but it creates more of a bubble around those assets than it needs to be. What do you think about that?
you're not wrong, but I'm going to add some elements to what you just said. Usually, when those guys take these loans, that means that they perhaps have like 5 or 10 times the amount to cover the loan. Otherwise, they would
Yeah.
not take in the first place. Those are you talking about. We call them margin loans, and they're not taxed. That's in fact why they take those loans instead, because you don't have to you're never taxed on the loan. So that's how people who are financially savvy use debt to increase their wealth. And that's how even most billionaires live. In fact, it shows the power of ownership. That's all it's about. That's why ownership is a very powerful thing. That's why we always, that's even one of the reasons why people create businesses, so that they can use, instead of using the mortgage, they can use their shares or the entire business as collateral to take those loans. So it's true that it does create inflation because the commercial bank creates money to give them as a loan. But again, they're like, if they take whatever the amount of loan they're taking, they usually have 5 or 10 times the amount in the bank to cover the loan. That's why they can afford taking that. Otherwise, I don't think they would be doing it. Plus, as you know, those guys are very wealthy. They have like financial advisors who, they consult before
Yeah.
making any of those, before making any of those actions or taking any of those actions. So, but you do have a point, and I do agree that if they were not smart enough and they did what they're doing without without the financial literacy backing them up, yeah, it will create a major disruption in the economy. Absolutely, not just for the company itself, but the economy, because their companies weigh so much. If a company like Amazon tanks, is going to take a toll on the entire economy. Literally, same for Tesla, or Berkshire Hathaway, or any major corporation.
Yeah. As far as we've had a history of, in 2001, the airlines had to get bailed out after 9/11 happened. In, I think 2008, GM and other companies had to get bailed out.
Mhm.
Is the reason that we have to bail out these companies because we did it once and then we just got hooked?
If there's a reason,
Like, in my opinion, we should never have bailed out GM. Like, people act like, oh, what would it do to the economy? Well, the assets, the hard assets, are not going anywhere. They would be bought up by somebody for pennies on the dollar, and then somebody would be able to start another business with those same assets at a discount, and the economy would ultimately bounce back to some degree. There might be economic downturn from it for sure, but we keep having these bailouts, and it creates a bigger and bigger bubble, in my opinion.
yeah,
And
I totally agree with you. It's they're just moral hazards,
yeah,
and that's a problem with central banking.
yeah,
Bailing out doesn't help, because I did some research on free banking, specifically Scottish free banking. And if you ask, right, the average American, should we abolish the Federal Reserve? They'd be like, no, no way. Although there's plenty of reasons to abolish it. The two major economic crises in human recorded history happened under central banking: the Great Depression and the Great Recession. We have more like recessions under the Federal Reserve. The value of currency is tanking. So you know that there's plenty of reasons to get rid of it. And people still can't imagine life and the economy without a central authority allocating resources for us instead of
yeah,
relying on ourselves. That brings me to Scottish free banking. One interesting thing about Scottish free banking is that it was a very stable system. There was no central bank. Banks compete with one another. But what made it stable was the fact that it had unlimited liability. So that means that the owners of the bank had their personal wealth attached to the bank, so they cannot get into reckless lending practices like the way Lehman Brothers did in 2008, and creating an entire collapse of the economy. That was the beauty of free banking. Because what people don't understand about the free market forces you to be responsible. Because if you mess up, there are consequences.
yeah,
But when you have a central authority backing things, you're like, why should I care? I can engage into reckless lending practices. At the end of the day, if there's a bank run, the government will come and save me. Therefore, yeah, it completely disincentivize organization to have any market discipline. That's the problem with bailouts. That's why when companies fail, let them fail, so that those who are coming will behave. That's number one. Number two, it's normal for a company to fail. People don't understand that the market is a process. It's an organism, right? When a company fails, the way I see is that it means that that company has reached its point and therefore evaporates, and a new company is now coming to take over. For example, even in 2008, right, many banks were failing, like Lehman Brothers, and I think there are two or a few other banks that failed. Why we all focus on the housing market collapsing because of those banks, giving loans to underwater borrowers. There was a uh, new companies were getting formed in Silicon Valley, creating a larger market. WhatsApp, Facebook was now becoming much bigger. Instagram was being created. So all these tech companies now were basically filling the vacuum of that ecosystem. So that's what the market is an organism that filled itself out, because we say nature harbors a vacuum. Someone goes, there's someone to replace it. And it's important for people to understand the market that way, rather than thinking that we need a central authority to come and regulate this and that and that and that. People who are actually making up the central authority are themselves human beings like you and I. They're flooded people. They will make bad decisions. But the worst part is that they don't pay the consequences of their bad decisions.
So, yeah, with take GM for instance, I would imagine, I haven't looked this up, I should, but I'd imagine the value of GM right now is higher than it was when it was bailed out, which is absurd when you think about it. It's like they shouldn't be worth more than when they were not like right when they were failing, but prior to that, when they were, 2006 or so. They're probably worth a bit more than that because they had money pumped in that they didn't have to do anything for. They just were given money and able to create more.
Yeah.
But as far as these bailouts are concerned, is the reason that we seem to be stuck in this cycle of bailing out large enough companies. Is this because we did it once and then we just got hooked and we just couldn't stop doing it? Like we did it once and it's like, well, we bailed out a $2 billion company. Now we can't not bail out the $3 billion company. Okay, now we can't not bail out the $10 billion company. We can't just let these companies fail.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, yes, I will literally back your point that yes, because we're stuck. And I think once you start this, rent seekers come to you. So big companies now lobby, right? They use the practice of rent seeking. They buying political favors. They say, okay, we're going to help you get in office. We're going to help you do this in exchange. If we have issues, you're going to bail us out. That's the whole reason why we're backing you.
Yeah.
That's how it works, because it happened once. And now central authorities are forced to keep doing it if they want to keep their jobs too. Because that's what it's about. Because I don't think they just bail them out because, oh yeah, they're big. No, it's because there's a commitment underneath. They say, okay, those guys gave us a lot of money to, for campaigns and stuff like that. We have to. Because those bailouts are actually laws. They're actually legislations passed by senators. And those senators are backed by big corporations. So they have to. But I totally agree with you. It's because it happened once and now they got hooked with their hands tied. They have no choice. So even when they believe that, even when they know that deep down, yeah, we should let them fail. But because there is some sort of contract between them, they're forced to respect their hand of the bargain. Otherwise, there will be repercussions.
So we've talked about the problems with the economy, and some of I typically refer to it as a house of cards because I think it is a house of cards. Um, what is the solution? Is there a solution, or are we just kind of headed in a certain direction and there's no turning around?
Oh no, there is a solution. The question is like, will the government want to implement that? That's the question. Of course, there is a solution. The solution is will be to bring the economy back to a commodity-based economy. But government will not want to do that because it will restrain its power of spending. Like if you have when you tie your entire economy to a finite resource, where you can't just spend the way you want to spend. You have to spend accordingly to the amount of to the fixed amount of of that finite resource you have in store. So government will not want to do that because they will say, well, if we do it, we won't be able to build schools for you. We won't be able to build roads for you. We won't be able to create those programs for you. It goes against your interest. We need to spend so that you'll be okay. So,
Yeah,
of course, one way, for example, to reduce the national debt is for government to reduce its size, but government will not want that. They create programs every year with hundreds, if not thousands, of employees
yeah,
for no reason, right? So that's one way to do it, but no, it's they will not want to, although there's a solution to it. It's to tie money back to to a commodity so that the dollar will regain its value. It will increase the purchasing power of people and it will contain inflation. Any person who tells you that inflation is necessary for the economy doesn't understand economics at all.
yeah.
Doesn't at all.
How would that work? So we have $34 trillion of debt.
Mhm.
Let's say we go back to a gold standard somehow. How would that actually look as far as returning to the gold standard and having $34 trillion in fiat debt?
The problem is that the in order for us to first return to the gold standard, we have to pay off the debt. And economists say, well, we owe it to ourselves, so we don't have to. No, you have to. And the way we pay up the debt is through the future generations because they're the one that incurring the cost of living. Today, right, a house costs $430,000. In 10, maybe 15 years, that very same house will cost $1 million. Although it
Yeah,
didn't grow in size, its value did not necessarily increase, but the price has increased because of that. So the future generations are paying the debt, which is not fair to them. They will incur a cost of living that is way higher than what it's supposed to be. So we have to first pay up the debt ourselves, then now tie money to tie money to gold to that commodity. So that's a question here, like how are we going to pay that debt first?
yeah,
If we have to borrow then to pay it, it's like a Ponzi scheme, right?
yeah.
It's
It
like
is.
it is a Ponzi scheme. And that's why I say the central bank is technically a Ponzi scheme because you when you use old debt, when you use new borrowed money to buy an old debt, that new money you use now has interest too, and then it goes on and it never stops. So that's what the trick is.
Yeah,
How to pay it, what method. Definitely we cannot borrow more to completely pay the 34 trillion. So now we're in that vicious cycle. So it's hard, but that is literally the ways to first pay off the debt, be debt free, then build wealth. The same way at your personal level, if you have like student loans, you want to pay your loans first, then now build wealth. It's the same for the nation, but that will require drastic changes.
yeah. It's funny you mentioned Ponzi scheme. Obviously, I have some pro Bitcoin, pro crypto arguments, and I've heard people call Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme. And every time I hear someone say that, I'm like, "So, what do you think about the U.S. dollar?" Because you know,
No, I personally don't think it's necessarily that crypto is necessarily a Ponzi scheme. It's just I personally like my view is
yeah,
that it's not backed by anything, and I just think in general for people, as I said again, right, like people are free to invest in it. I just tell people that don't put your life savings, because
Yeah,
putting
yeah,
your life savings something you don't control. It's like expecting a miracle.
yeah,
Technically, that's what it is. Like you put your money into something, and then you have faith that it will magically. No, you change your life, not something else will. That's what even me, who invests in stocks, I don't put all my money in stocks. Never. No way.
yeah, yeah.
No way.
And honestly, I love the idea of the U.S. economy and the debt being paid off and returning back to a gold standard or something. But we have people like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. I don't even know how old they're. Both probably either 70s or 80s, and it's like they're not going to be around to see the consequences of all the destruction that they created. And that's typical of most people in Congress. Like that, it's not their problem. It's the next person's problem. And with presidents, it's the same thing. It's like Joe Biden has no incentive to fix anything on his watch because he's out in a maximum of 5 years. So 1 to 5 years, and he's gone. And then it's the next guy's problem or next woman's problem, whoever. And same thing. Whoever gets in next, they don't want to deal with it. They want to pass it on to the next person. So the incentive in America is to pass the buck, essentially, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's there is a South African entrepreneur that I follow on Instagram. His name is Vusi Tembekwayo. He's a very great speaker. He said something that actually stuck with me. He said politicians are like doctors in a lab who leave the lab before seeing the results of the experiment.
Yeah, it's very true. Very true. I
Right.
love that. Well, Germinal, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know you have something else to get to after this. So I like to ask most of my guests about books. I know you've written a few books, so feel free to include your books that you've written. What are some books that you would recommend listeners to read? Some of your favorite books that you've read or written.
Well, I will start with mine then. In French, we say La charité bien ordonnée commence par soi-même, meaning that good charity starts with ourselves. So I will recommend a history of wealth distribution in the United States. It's a 2-volume book that I wrote last year that was published on January 1st, 2023. It basically give a historical analysis of wealth distribution in the US. How did we come up with the inequality we have today? So there's that. I will recommend books from Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics. That's a classic. Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson. These two books, so Hazlitt and Thomas Sowell's book, are quite similar. It's about economics, like the fundamental principles of economics. I would recommend also books from Ludwig von Mises. There's one book called Socialism. It's a 600-page book, but fascinating book, man. Great book. He literally debunked socialism from every possible aspect. He did not leave a chance. So I highly recommend people to get that book. And another book that I would recommend is also A Monetary History of the United States by Milton Friedman. It gives, so basically Milton Friedman gave he recounts a history of money in the United States, and he gave a very detailed macroeconomic account of the Great Depression. So I know that people who lean more like Austrians will not agree with Milton Friedman, and that's fine and it's fair. But I think it's important to read his work too, because I think he's one of the greatest economists to ever exist. And the last book, let me see. The last book I would recommend is The Calculus of Consent. This one is more technical, but it explains, so it's an economic analysis of politics. It
Hmm.
explains the way we vote, why we vote a certain way, and how government is not an alternative to correct markets, how government is as flooded as people are in the private sector. So it's a great book. Let me actually show it to you here. It's called The Calculus of Consent by James Buchanan. Yeah, it's a very good book. But it is, I have to admit, it's quite technical. So, uh, yeah, so be ready if you want to read that.
Awesome. Thank you. Before we wrap up, could you give listeners a way to find you, find about your publishing company, and anything else that you would like to share?
Sure. So anyone can find me on Instagram. That's the social media platform I'm the most active on. I'm also, of course, on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, and I don't have TikTok. I'm not a TikTok guy. But yeah, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I'm also active on Twitter, but Instagram is the one where I'm the most active. And you guys can visit ggvpublishingcompany.com. That's the website of my publishing company. So for any of you who have written a manuscript that is nonfiction, you have a chance. I'm not guaranteed that we necessarily accept your manuscript right away. The quality still have to be there, but you have a chance to become an author if you try and if you submit your manuscript to GGV Publishing. So yeah, don't hesitate. Visit the website. We publish great authors there. We have the books. You guys can purchase their books too on the website or directly on Amazon. It's up to you. But yeah, visit GGV Publishing Company and also read the articles published on the Lake Street Review, which is the online journal that I own as well. So yeah, I own two companies technically.
Awesome. Germinal, it was an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I would love to have you again in the future if you'd be down.
Thank you very much, Artie. It was a pleasure to be on your platform. It was very entertaining, and thank you for literally allowing me to express my views. I know not everyone agree with what I have to say, and that's good because I think Lyndon Johnson said, if two people agree, only one person is thinking. So it's good that we have disagreement. Sometimes it brings, the civil discourse. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, more people should talk to people they disagree with.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Thoughtfully Mindless. If our conversations resonate with you, consider leaving a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your streaming platform of choice. Your ratings help us grow and reach more listeners. Don't hesitate to spread the word about our podcast. It's one of the best ways you can support us. I'm always eager to hear from you, so find me on Twitter at TMConvos or follow us on Instagram at Thoughtfully Mindless for a peek behind the scenes and more thoughtful content. And if you're looking for additional ways to support the show, visit fractalzoo.net where you can find exclusive t-shirts and apparel. Each purchase contributes directly to the podcast and allows us to keep bringing you content that matters. Thank you once again for lending us your ears. Until next time, stay thoughtfully mindless.